Here we are, Renee. Welcome back.
Hey, how are you? How you
I'm
doing?
great.
Yeah, we're not in the same place again. So you're on the road again this week, aren't you?
I am on the road and I'm just excited to be here.
I bet. So what are we going to be talking about today? So we're going to do some conversation live from Indiana for you and not Indiana for me because I did not go on this road trip. But to kick us off, like what have you been doing on the farm or maybe getting out and about while you're on this trip? What's going on?
Well, I've been scouting crops out here across Indiana, Kentucky, and Tennessee. There's some knee-high corn out here, and it's not knee-high at home while we're
No.
recording this. So, and you know what? I accidentally went to CMA Fest. So I should have brought my cowboy boots because
All
like
right.
when you take a last minute flight, you don't always look at what's happening in the city. And so coming up through
No,
Nashville, I ended up seeing Blake and Rascal Flats as I walked down Broadway. So,
that's pretty
just
cool.
an interesting time.
That's pretty cool. That's stuff we like to do is run into whatever's going on in the day and just take advantage of it. So it sounds like today we're going to have a long conversation about what the justice system is thinking about and doing related to substance use and behavioral health and juvenile court and courts at the federal level, which is a really exciting conversation. But to kick us off, we always have to think about the fact that the executive branch, so that's like your governor and your legislature. The legislative branch is your legislators. There's three legs of government. The third is that judicial branch. And those two, the governor and the legislature, they can't tell that judicial branch what to do. And so it's really good when the judicial branch takes point. And so I'm excited about this conversation because clearly they've got some ideas and they're the ones making the decisions, especially with folks that are in that space that end up making bad decisions and bad choices as far as where they're going to go next for treatment and things like that. So I'm excited to talk about this. So who did you get to listen to there in Indiana that kind of kicks off this conversation?
Well, first, we'll just kick off. I'm at the Indiana Rural Health Association
Mhm.
annual meeting, second time back. And this is really a great state to be in. I think we talked last year a little bit about how progressive Indiana has really been. And we got to hear from the state Supreme Court Justice this morning. And I thought that'd be really the best conversation to have as we kick this off because she gets it. She was a juvenile court judge. She's
Mm.
all about families. She's all about behavioral health treatment and courts. And, she did mention, and Renee, not to dispute what you said earlier, she did mention that their legislature passed a law that all their judges have to go to mandatory training every year. And that
Wow.
training includes, and she's made it be about behavioral health and trauma to kids.
That wouldn't work in our state, but
Well, I know
glad
it.
to hear it. I mean, it works if your chief judge just says this is what we're gonna do. I mean,
Yep.
because really, truly, they do get to choose because they're an independent branch. So this would probably not be happening with your chief justice, but
Well,
glad to hear she's there.
she's doing it and she's leading some national initiatives right
That's
now
awesome.
with some of the national Supreme Court justice groups that she's part of. And so, I think as we heard Chief Justice Loretta Rush talk about their response here in Indiana, she kind of went back to the 90s and she goes, we all know what didn't work because there was lots of bad ideas in the
Bad
90s.
ideas.
That's remember the scared straight type
Yeah.
stuff. We could go through
The dare stuff. Don't do drugs.
dare,
This is
tough
your
on.
egg. This is your brain on drugs with eggs in a frying pan.
Yeah, she said some of the tough on crime stuff, those initiatives didn't work.
No,
And
no.
like every state, they just got really good at locking people up.
Yes.
And so she actually kind of went back to the drawing board and she said, she looked at her state constitution and kind of paralleled that with the United States Constitution. And there's a line in the Indiana Constitution that says justice is not supposed to be vindictive justice. It's supposed to be restorative justice. And are they really living that and walking that in everything that they do? And I was fascinated by that and the way she
Yeah.
talked about that.
That's a really hard line to file because, especially if you've got victims and victim families, they want vindictive justice. And if they're
Yes.
very loud and they're very bolsterous about what they want and how many years they think somebody should, and almost, and there's a few, but general gist is like, well, my person doesn't have a future life, so that person shouldn't either. Kind of this
Mhm.
eye for an eye, life for a life. And the data behind all of that doesn't show that that's effective at all. And so it's good to hear that she's pulling out, some other thoughts. So what else did she have to say about Indiana and what some of the things that they're doing?
Well, so they're really focusing on treatment and specialty courts here. And so she's
Mm,
really behind setting up those initiatives. She gave some examples of, if someone's caught with a syringe, they could get stuck in jail for a really long time because it's a level 6 offense. And there's no reason for someone who just has syringes to be in jail for an extended amount of time. It's a waste of resources. And so why can't those people be diverted? So she was really about diversion programs and how do you get judges on board to listen to the treatment providers? And how do you work together as a team to be able to do that? And that's been the focus of her training for all the judges. The summit that she had, judges from every county in the state were there, along with their teams, to go back and implement some of these things. And I found that really refreshing because I haven't seen statewide responses to really look at why are there so many people in jails? Why aren't we connecting people to treatment? She knew the data. She was able and we'll talk about some of the data she talked about here in a minute, of this is the number of people who have behavioral health and substance use disorders in our system. And she pretty much said, it's all of them. So
Yeah.
let's stop, kidding ourselves.
Right. The whole tough on drugs period of time, whenever those years were, the laws on the books really just put drug users in for, I mean, it's dozens and dozens and dozens of years. And in our state, you'll see 50-year sentences in our state for drugs. And that's higher than violent crime in a lot of places. And I don't get it. I don't get it at all. It's one thing if you were a dealer and you killed someone else, and so then now you're in for the life of a person, maybe for 50 years. But the fact that you have your drugs and that's what you got caught with because you're a user and have an addiction, now you've got 50 years and you're being treated the same way as a very violent offender by the law. And that's just crazy.
Here's the variability. And here's the story she told. She said there was a woman. She was working with community corrections in a drug court setting. The judge, the team, probation, were all on board that this woman shouldn't be in prison. While she was out, she opened 2 recovery homes while she was on probation, while she was clean and sober. She was going back to court every 6 months, just like it was indicated she should do for her to meet all of her requirements. A new judge was elected to that county. She went back in for the check-in, and that judge sentenced her to 30 years in prison.
That's insane. It's
That
insane.
happened.
It does. Oh, it does.
And,
I've met the
and
people.
so,
I've met the people.
so
Yeah.
this person who's in recovery, living a life in recovery, contributing back and opening recovery houses, like a
Yeah.
business person now, is now sentenced to 30 years in jail. Luckily, the Chief Justice intervened and she's out. She's opened 6 more of those recovery houses since then. But this happens all the time, Renee. I know
It
you
does.
see this, but I don't think everyone understands just
No,
how mixed up the system can get in
no.
dealing with these issues and the variability depending on the judge, the court, and all those other things.
Yeah, and what's really fascinating too is the hypocritical messages that we get. Because on the one hand, a lot of people will say, well, I believe in people having second chances, but they certainly don't relate it to the person that committed the crime that they're interested in. That person doesn't deserve it, but everybody else deserves it. And it
Mhm.
reminds me a lot of voting, right? We don't like, whoever's elected in office, but we really like ours. So we reelect ours and then are really mad that there's all these people elected we don't like. Well, you just elected the one that you had
Right.
control over because, well, you know that one, but you're mad about these others you don't have jurisdiction. Same mess right here. And, it's that they're really good about second chances as long as it doesn't relate to them. And it goes back to the same kind of stigma we have in behavioral health with not in my backyard on treatment houses and facilities. And it's just this attitude that, yeah, in general, because most people would say, oh, yeah, I believe in second chances. But in reality, when you talk to them, it's hard. And I meet some folks that are walking that line when we listen to victims, and they're those folks that really do believe in second chances. And really, you can hear it in their voice. They're like, well, we want them to be healthy. We want them to be rehabilitated. We want them to not do drugs again. We want them to not commit crime again, but they hurt my person. And it's a hard spot to be in. And so that's exciting that at least the Supreme Court in that case could intervene and
Yeah.
and overturn that elected judge's position
Right.
because yeah, I mean he could have came in with a tough on crime kind of
Yep.
mentality or tough on
Right.
drugs or whatever the issue was and back to 30 years again, even though they're a
Right.
productive person in society. And that's crazy. So what else did you learn from the Chief Justice? Anything else you want to
Well,
talk
I think, the tie back to what we're doing here is rural health,
about?
social drivers, the social determinants of health, of really looking at what trauma does the system provide people, right? It's about
Yeah.
housing, food, healthcare, access to substance use treatment. And, we sometimes forget the criminal justice system is the single largest source of referral to the substance use treatment.
I
Um,
believe that. I believe that.
and that was the system, that's from SAMHSA. And so, why aren't providers from physical health care, behavioral health care, substance use disorders, why aren't we partnering more with the legal system, with the judicial system, with our local judges in our local counties and figuring out a better system? Here in Indiana, they're embedding behavioral health staff in the Supreme Court to be interpreters because she was very open. We all don't speak the same language. And we've
Right.
got to get providers not to be afraid of taking people who are court ordered. And the judicial has to do a better job of working alongside community providers. And I
That's
think
really
that
exciting.
that
Yeah.
was really a great message to take away from all of this. Because if we look at a lot of the issues we talk about in every conference we go to in rural areas, it all goes back to jails
Yeah.
and it all goes back to jails and criminal activity, right?
Yeah.
Because that's what happens when people aren't treated, don't have access to care, and all the other things that go wrong in someone's life.
Right. As we've talked about before, that is the free location for people to go at this point. People don't have to pay anything to be put in jail. Well, they may have to pay more than they realize. There's a lot of fees and fines that go along with that on the backside.
Right.
So let's move into the data on this. And I know we're going to start off talking about how 70% of those in jail have a mental health or a substance use disorder. But you and I could probably argue that that may be a little bit low. I know, and this is talking jail specifically, but in our prisons, we're seeing some interesting changes where they're talking about changing people's diagnoses or whatever to try to avoid stigma, which doesn't actually address the person's issues or the challenges that they're facing. We just call it something different, and as if that's going to make it all better. And it's just becoming confusing for the client. And so, talk to me about that. What other kind of data did you pull and have you heard about while you're at this conference in Indiana?
Well, what I really want to do is put in the show notes, and I just clicked out of it. Put in our show notes some of the reports that were highlighted for
Mm,
us, right? Some
okay.
things that are happening at a national level, with Supreme Court justices all across the country who are coming together and putting together some solid documents to go back and implement in our states.
Awesome.
And I think, if you live in one of those states and you're not sure what's happening within your judicial branch, there is a blueprint out there. There are bench briefs available to share with judges that are written for them in judge language, if you will, right? And I think if you're a provider, you need to read those too, because you need to understand how they're thinking, what they're being guided to do, and what that looks like. And so we have courts as leaders in the crisis of addiction, which is a really great brief. You can go out there and read. State Courts Leading Change is a really great brief as well. And then there's a whole bunch of resources. And I was just clicking on it because I was clicking. I just listened to this session an hour ago, Renee. So I haven't read all these documents myself. But if you take a look at the National Center for State Courts,
Yep.
this is a resource that I don't think I was aware of, Renee, but it has a lot of really good stuff. And so if you go under the tab for behavioral health, we'll link it in the show notes. I highly encourage folks to take a look at this. This is kind of one of those gold ducats that I take away from a conference sometimes, of things like, this is exactly what I've needed from time to time to help to explain to someone or to help to get a better understanding of a system, where we're working. And so again, these things are sometimes hidden from us if we don't know where to go look and where to go find them. But what a huge resource that's available to all of us.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, and when we're talking about data, when we're talking about people that are incarcerated, it can vary and it can depend based on what they've been told in the past, where they come in. My greatest frustration working in corrections currently is that you may have historical data of what they were diagnosed with in the community, then they come into the institution and they may or may not continue on that path. And then in the institution, they may diagnose something differently that they're seeing. We have a bad habit of putting a lot of things in remission that I don't know according to the DSM-5 can actually go into remission. And so because you're in a confined location under pretty strict supervision, those things, aren't seen. But that's not true then when you release them back out and they're in the more open, do whatever I want kind of mindset, some of those things pop back up. So we're not doing them a good service if we're not treating people consistently. Because yes, in a structured environment, they would appear differently, but it's the amount of stress that we hear about for people reentering is very high. And so if we're sending them out the door and they've decided to quote, stop my meds before I get out because, whatever reason, we're just doing a disservice to set them out then back to where they were before they were stabilized. And, you know, it's a wild cycle that we're seeing, and it's hard because you're putting them out. Reentry is the hard place. Anybody will tell you, when we had our conversation a couple weeks back with Josh, our peer support
Yeah.
recovery specialist, right? He will tell you the prison part was easy. It was the reentry part and the public part that's hard. So then why in the world aren't we gearing them up for the hard part with all the necessary supports and
Right.
tools that they need? And that's coming out with their Medicaid or Medicare. They're coming out with the prescriptions, coming out with,
Mhm.
their next appointments and the handoffs and all the things that we talk about that are missing. So frustrating. But I'm really excited to hear that there's other states that may have some good ideas, because
Mhm.
we're always in need of a good idea or two in our world.
Absolutely. Yeah. Totally invigorating. And I went to some other sessions as well,
Oh, all
Renee,
right. Cool.
and I have to say, they were different types of sessions than I'm used to going to.
Okay, talk about that. What's different?
Well, one of the plenaries, which I thought was an interesting spin, was we got to hear gridiron to the workplace,
Okay. Like
team
football?
building, football,
Football.
an SEC referee, college football referee, talking to us about teamwork. Now, I
Interesting.
spent some time thinking about the applicability of
Oh, yeah.
because there is a lot of teamwork when you're, a
I don't get
referee,
to throw
you're
flags
working,
though in my
you don't get to
office.
throw flags, you got to think
Oh,
quickly. I'm gonna get some flags made that say rural policy partners on them so I can
oh,
throw a
okay.
flag now and then.
Throw a
I
flag in
think we
favor.
should be able to throw flags. So that's gonna be one of my goals is
Can
that we
can
like,
we throw flags when we're in really boring presentations and they're doing a bad
yes,
job?
we
Maybe that
should.
should be the
Like
flag on the
we
field.
should be able
Be
to
like,
like
hey,
assess
people are
assess
on their phones and not even paying
like
attention.
like
Flag on the field.
acronym
Oh,
penalties.
acronym
Like
soup, flag on the
I
field.
think I think
There
we
could
could
be rules we could make up for this game
I
now,
think we
Jason.
could.
I'm actually pretty excited about this idea.
So
So besides that one, you also had a couple other other plenaries and things that you listened
well,
to. So what else was
so
interesting?
so I don't know how much you TikTok, Renee, but
Not a lot, but a little.
so I have actually seen this one before, and so it's
Okay.
Dr. Glaucomflecken. I don't know if you're familiar with Dr. Glaucomflecken.
I can't say that I am. Tell me about it.
He's an ophthalmologist, and so
Okay.
he actually went to the University of Iowa, and
Oh,
so
cool.
he got his degree there, and so he and his wife talk about some of their transitions through life. And so what's really interesting about this story is he's a cancer survivor. But kind of the worst part of his story, I guess, or the best part now, because he's using it as an educational tool, is he had a heart attack when he was 34 years old, and his
Wow.
wife did CPR, and so it was kind of he does comedy now, which is kind of odd.
Interesting.
But through part of their presentation, they played the 911 call, and you don't really see it coming when they played the 911 call, where the 911 operator talks through his wife how to do CPR, and she had to do CPR for 10 minutes. And so we listened to the conversation. It was it was pretty tough to listen to, I'll be
Yeah.
honest. And then she talks about the trauma that she still has today from that experience and how the healthcare system didn't support her.
Yeah.
It's about supporting the person with the heart condition, about
Wow.
doing things for them. And then they talk about the bills that they ended up with. Now he's a doctor, right?
Yeah.
And she was going to be a neurologist. She got her master's degree in neurology, and they had to fight United Healthcare for years and years over
Oh
twenty
my
thousand
God.
dollars because the hospital was in network, but one of the physicians that worked there wasn't, and he should have gotten pre-authorization. He was almost dead and
Yeah. So
unconscious
he's
when he was
definitely going to
taken
be
to
all
that
about pre-op.
hospital. And
Uh-huh.
so, it's just it's a different way.
Well, good
His
for him
TikTok,
for,
his TikTok video that's very famous, though, you've probably seen it,
yeah.
is he did one about Iowa farmers, how they never go to the doctor. And an Iowa farmer goes to the doctor and he's consulting with, and he's like, well, what am I supposed to do? A farmer came in. And like, did he stop working? He's like, yeah. Farmers don't stop working to come to the doctor. Get the crash cart, go because it's serious, right? And so if you haven't seen that, we might have to find that TikTok and link it
I
just
can't
because
wait. You should
it
definitely
is
have that played for us because
it is a
that's
lot
up
of
your
fun.
alley.
But I think sometimes it's good to kind of listen to some of these other types of folks who are talking differently about healthcare because it's more mainstream, having the conversation about trauma, having the conversation about behavioral healthcare and how the healthcare system is impacting that. I found it interesting. It was a
Yeah,
little
and the
odd
lack of support for the
sometimes.
family. We talk
Yeah.
about that, but what a cool way to, I mean, a horrible experience to have to go
Oh,
through, but what a cool way now to talk about how his wife wasn't treated well and
yeah.
not considered or supported as the family, which is the message we're trying to get out too. So it's an interesting way to get that out there. And then, wow, how timely that he had the same healthcare system as the guy that got shot for not paying
I
people's
know.
bills. So,
I
wow,
know.
what a deal. All right. Well, as we move forward today, let's talk about the recovering politician self-care policy of the week. And I understand Jason has one too, but mine's going to be about going out for lunchtime walks over the break, over the lunch hour. I could find myself just piddling around in the office and just continuing to work when I have a break instead of actually taking a break. And I've been trying to get myself to like use those break times to actually maybe just take a little walk outside, go do something else, do whatever it takes just to have that real break and see the sunshine or what hit the rain on the rainy days, whatever it is, just to really get help me refocus in the middle of the day. And that's actually been it's very valuable when I do it. It's just amazing how fast breaks can go where you're messing around and can't actually use the break for a break. So you're at a conference and we always talk about this for you and I always talk about travel and making sure that I stay on. But what do you get to do on this travel trip that's
Well,
different than what you have
Well, I
for
was just
self?
going to tell you, yesterday, I had to present in the morning. I went to all the sessions. You got to go to breaks and network. You
Yeah.
don't get out of that big conference room or the
No.
conference section, even of the hotel. Like you're kind of stuck there, like 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. if you go to all
Yeah.
the appetizer things and all the networking sessions. And, we do a lot of that stuff because that's the work that we do. It could be a really long day. And like I was out last night early because sometimes it's just, hard just because it's exhausting to go
Yeah.
through and do all the things every day. But this conference, Indiana Rural Health, they have a 5K and it happened to be this morning. And so here's my medal that I got from running a 5K at 6:30 this morning. I even got a towel that says I
Look
ran a
at you.
5K this morning. I mean, so, you know,
It's almost like a Steelers terrible towel, but not
it
yellow.
kind of is, but
Kind of
I
is.
think the takeaway is I
Yeah.
wish more conferences did that because it
Yeah.
kind of
Cool.
motivated you. They added a 1.5 mile walk this year, and actually more people went out and walked at 6:30 than
That'd be
actually
me. 100%.
ran. But it was that little bit of inspiration I needed. I woke up early anyway, and I'm like, you know what? I'm just gonna go do it.
That's
And I
awesome.
think that that's something. It's a good takeaway, I think, for other conferences.
Yes.
That if we're gonna hand out drink tickets the night before, then we should have healthy options as well, especially if we're promoting public health and rural health. Then let's be serious about health. That we can have both, and let's give lots of options for folks.
Yeah.
And so,
We keep talking about this. In our next life, we should be conference consultants because
I
we've seen
agree.
so many bad ones. Maybe we should like pull the best of after this tour of travel, all of this, and be like, hey, here's how to do a good conference, and here's some things to avoid because
We need to make
really
a
cool idea.
list of all the things that people should keep doing and a list of all the things that every conference should
I really
stop
like it.
doing.
I really like it. Well, today, everybody, Jason's on the road. He's in Indiana with the Hoosier State talking about the Hoosiers, and he got to hear about Chief Justice Loretta Rush talking about the judiciary's response to substance use disorders, which is a pretty cool topic. Sounds like the judicial system has taken the lead in Indiana and very helpful. And it sounds like we've got some really great options to list to reflect and go back and read in our show notes today that you're going to want to chat to dive in and find out more about what's happening federally that might impact you wherever you are. So thank you for everybody for being with us today. Before we go, just don't forget, please follow us on LinkedIn and Facebook or YouTube. If you leave us a positive review, we'll send you a prize. Have a great day, everybody. See you next time.